One of the first things aspiring outdoor photographers are told is that you shouldn't go beyond ISO 100 so that you can get the cleanest and sharpest images. And only go higher if it's like an emergency situation. But that's some of the worst advice one can give you. Simply by raising the ISO, you can get the photographs that you are wanting to get. Hi, I'm Hugo. I help outdoor photographers go from button clickers into storytelling photographers. In this video, I'll go through why you shouldn't be scared of raising your ISO higher and why that actually can benefit you a lot. But before we dive in, if you haven't checked out Focus Notes, my newsletter where I share exclusive insights from my photography journey, make sure to join 7,500 photographers from the link below. Alright, so I used to be scared of ISO. I thought if I would raise it, then I would ruin my photographs, but I was so wrong, and I missed so many great photographs because I tried to just go for ISO 100. Like, it's crazy. And the sad thing is that most people make ISO seem more important and more scary than it needs to be. So no wonder you might be also scared to use more than ISO 100. Nowadays, I happily shoot from ISO 8000 to ISO 12800. And after this video, you might realize that you should do the same. Alright, so let's dive into it. Let's first go through why people are scared to use ISO, raised ISO, and why some people are preaching don't use anything higher than ISO 100. And yeah, that's just nonsense, but now let's go through why that advice is out there. And the advice is out there because the more ISO, the bigger the ISO you are using, then the more grain you have in your images. And if now we were having this conversation and it would be like in the 1900s, then we wouldn't be having this discussion because then these people would be right, like use ISO 100 and stuff. But now we are in 2025 and maybe even beyond when you're watching this, and nobody should be telling that use ISO 100. It's just terrible advice. So why is this terrible advice? I'm gonna go through a few reasons now, but the first thing is that, my friend, in 2025 and beyond, you can get rid of the extra grain in your photos. You can get rid of it in a very simple way. Nowadays, you don't even need like some softwares. I used to use like Topaz AI denoise, but now you don't need to get these external softwares because it is very likely that the software you're using has some kind of like a feature for this. I use Lightroom and it has the denoise feature. So I hit one button and it gets rid of the grain. It gets rid of the grain. That's why, one of the reasons why I am not scared to bring it up. Now, of course, if you don't need to bring the ISO up, then sure, like use ISO 100. But you shouldn't be scared to raise it. And that brings us to another point that I want to talk about. And that is that when to raise the ISO. So, understanding ISO, of course, does bring the extra grain, but then ISO also makes the photograph brighter. So, say you are photographing something that is like fast moving. And in that case, you're gonna need to have your shutter speed higher. And what that causes is that the image will be darker. So now you need to compensate for the lost light in some way. And this is where ISO comes into play. So you can just simply raise the ISO and get a perfect exposure. Another thing is that if you are photographing like leaves outside, you shouldn't try to use ISO 100 because very likely if you're photographing like leaves or photos where there are leaves and say it's windy, like, or at least a little bit, then what that means is that of course the leaves are gonna be moving, right? And if you have ISO 100, that likely means that your shutter speed is gonna be slower, which might then end up the leaves being then like out of focus. They are gonna be blurry. So, and that's because you didn't raise the ISO and you tried to get the cleanest and sharpest photo. Like, come on, like you can raise it. Don't listen to these people who say like ISO 100 only. Okay, so those were a couple of examples. Now another one is Aperture. So Aperture, like some people say like, hey, well, why don't you just get a like a smaller f-stop number to, like, why don't you use a smaller f-stop number? Like you could get more light and you don't need to raise the ISO. But they miss the point that if you change aperture, then you also change how the photo looks like dramatically sometimes. If you go from f11 to f13, probably the difference, ain't there. But then if you go from like f11 and you want to get the photo brighter and you go to f4, now the difference can be massive. So the aperture you choose does affect what story is coming across from the image. So you don't want to pick an aperture because you want a better exposure. No. You should pick shutter speed. That's what you are required based on what's moving around. You should have an aperture that reflects the story you want to tell, and then raise the ISO. So I want to show some examples to you, because this really, like, it's not your fault if you think that like you should use ISO 100, but yeah, like so many people are just talking about nonsense about this, and I just want to showcase some examples from me and how some of my photos they are definitely not ISO 100. So let me go through some. Now here we have a reindeer photograph with the northern lights, and this is a single exposure. And as you can imagine, now it's night, so there isn't a lot of light going on. Although here was some moonlight, but still. And of course the northern lights are a moving element, but especially a reindeer is a moving element. So I can't have like 5 seconds of shutter speed because the reindeer is not gonna be sharp. It's gonna be moving around. So if I want to get this well exposed, the only way to do that is to raise the ISO. And look, like, does this look very noisy, this image? Try to guess now in your mind, what ISO did I use for this? I used ISO 12,800 to take this photo. And now you might be like, wait, that doesn't look like 12,800. And my friend, this is the modern day 12,800, because we have denoise. So of course out of the camera this looked not good because there was a lot of grain. But all I had to do is hit a button to denoise and it gets rid of the noise. So why would I have risked that the reindeer would be moving even slightly and try to have like a smaller ISO? Like why would I do that? Like, just raise the ISO. Now let's go through another example. Alright, here we have a monkey photo that I got in Japan, and this wasn't now very high ISO, but it was higher than ISO 100. So of course I wanted that the monkey is sharp, right? I mean, if the monkey is blurry or there's motion blur, then what's the point, right? What's the the point? The point is to get a sharp and clean photo, and the only way to get a well exposed photo here was to raise the ISO. So what I did was I shot this at ISO 800. I used ISO 800, f5.6 and 13, how do you say, 1320, I don't know, 320, however you say it. But here I again wasn't scared of raised ISO, because I knew that even though ISO 800 on my Sony especially, it doesn't Sony asymmetry, it doesn't like show up nearly at all, but I still like to run the denoise on it, so I knew that it wouldn't be a problem. And here is a photograph from Bali, so I wanted to photograph this street, I knew that, but then what's of course the challenging regarding this is that it's very dark. So it's dark and I wanted someone in the photograph, and this moment like was going on fast, you know, like the biker just came around and I was like, I need to get the photo now. So what I chose is again a very high ISO. Now in this photograph, I knew that I'm gonna go with f4 because that's the lowest f-stop that I could go for, and I knew that I had to have somewhat of a decent shutter speed because the bike is of course moving, and then I had to raise my ISO a lot, a lot this time. So what I did was I used a shutter speed 1/125th of a second, and yeah, aperture was f4. And guess what ISO I used here? Was it 5,000? Was it 6,000? Was it 10,000? I used 16,000 when taking this photo. And now it looks all good with denoise. Alright, so don't be afraid of using the ISO. There are many people who will keep saying use ISO 100, but these people are speaking nonsense, and you know why after this video. That if you need to raise the ISO, then raise it, because the point is to capture a photograph and get it sharp and clean as possible. But sharpness comes first, because a sharp, grainy photo is better than a grainy photo that's like, you know, there's motion blur all over the place. So raise ISO when required, and know that when you have grain, you can just very simply remove it in post. So you don't need to worry about that. So hopefully you found this video insightful. Of course, ISO along with other settings are just the first step on your learning journey. The understanding these don't make you a great photographer. Unfortunately, you need to learn the art side, the storytelling side. And that's what I personally help outdoor photographers with inside my Storyteller's mentorship. So if you're someone who wants to go from a button clicker into a storytelling photographer whose photos move people and get wow reactions to their photographs, and that their photos aren't just technically okay anymore, then DM me ready on Instagram to apply to work with me. Or then if you don't have Instagram, then just hit the other link in the description. But yeah, hopefully this was insightful, and if you did find this insightful, then you would also find probably this insightful, where I go through how to get a perfect exposure constantly. So check that video out next.